Let me start by saying my name is John Baza. I'm the director for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, at least today. And we're going to have a pretty good presentation for you. And what we've outlined this meeting for is to talk publicly about the legislative audit that occurred with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining this past fall. The audit was released in November. We have, I think, a great plan moving forward as far as how we're going to address the concerns and issues that were identified in that legislative audit. And I think what you'll find is that because this meeting is principally designed to address the operating community, that what we're going to do is try to show you how this audit affects operations and how the outward-facing part of what we do as the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining will actually have some added value to operations and development in Utah. So let me start out that way, but there's a few logistic things that we have to talk about. First of all, there's a whole bunch of material that's been handed out and placed at your seats. But one thing that I was asked to identify and talk about was this save the date for the Uinta Basin Energy Summit, which is going to occur in Vernal at the end of August. I think they want to get this announcement out very soon so that people will save the date. But the other thing is, on the back side of this pamphlet, there is a contest that they're running. If you remember last year, they had a speaker who was a survivor of the Deepwater Horizon, the catastrophe in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, you know, how are they going to top that? Well, this is one way they're going to try. They're doing a contest to say if you can suggest a name of someone who would be a good keynote speaker for the summit in the fall, you have a chance of winning something. So keep that in mind and get your entry in. I have somebody in mind myself. I'm not going to tell you who it is because I don't want you to steal my idea, but I'll probably submit my own entry on that. The other thing I'll mention is I'm going to pass around our little roll sheet, and I'll start it at both ends of the room, so it might meet in the middle somewhere. But it's just for us to keep track of who's interested in attending this. So you may want to quickly check your name, email, your organization name, make sure it's all correct. If it is, put a check mark. If you need to correct anything, make the correction. I think there's some pages on back. If you're not listed, you can add your name so that you'll be part of our email distribution list for the meeting. Let me think. Bart or John, is there anything I'm missing before we get started? I want to welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here. We have quite a few people from the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining attending. Quite a few of our local elected officials. And I won't take the time to recognize all of you, but we really appreciate you being here. And then after we finish with the presentations today, I don't think this will take the whole 3 hours, but when we finish the presentations, I'll give a chance for just a generalized roundtable for anyone who wants to make mention of any issues going on in the counties or in the basin in general. So I'll go ahead and maybe I'll hand this to John. One of the things that I ought to mention is that we made a change structurally in the organization, and we moved John Rogers into a different role in the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. And in John's place as an interim deputy director, we have Bart Kettle. Bart, you might just want to raise your hand. I'm introducing Bart, but he'll tell you about himself and when he gives his presentation, which is after me on the agenda today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in to the presentation on the audit. Okay. Looks like that's up. Tommy, can you see that okay? Okay. So the legislative audit, it occurred in, probably started in earnest back in June. And it wasn't that we were targeted as an agency. What happened was that every 5 years, every department of state government undergoes an audit. And this year, it was Department of Natural Resources' turn. It started with, probably immediately after the legislative session, some auditors came to the department and started surveying the various issues in each of the department's divisions. There are 7 of them. And when they started talking to us, they said, well, you guys have such complicated responsibilities. We think you deserve your own special audit. Well, gee, we're really grateful for that. But they started the department's audit, and then with us, they really didn't get started in earnest with looking at us until about the June timeframe. So through the summer and then the fall, they worked on identifying the issues and writing up the audit, and it was finally released on November 19th to the Legislative Audit Subcommittee. And I was there. We had prepared a preliminary response to that and presented at that subcommittee meeting. The full report can be found at this website that's on the slide, and I'll just read it so the people on the phone can hear it. It is ogm.utah.gov/audit. At that, you can find a full link to the audit itself and to our response and any additional information that has been generated since the audit. The report itself is organized into 7 chapters. The first chapter is just a lot of background and information on the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. Chapters 2 through 4 are primarily associated with our regulatory processes, our prioritization of inspection. And I'm going to use a kind of a nomenclature here today. If you see something that is green and bold, that's kind of the outward-facing part that would have some maybe indirect effect on the operating committee. So they focused on those chapters also on our compliance and enforcement. So obviously, as an operating committee, you guys are concerned about that. You're worried about how well we're doing that job. I think as we've talked to people over the years in the operating community, they would like to ensure that we are consistent, fair, but we're doing our jobs in terms of compliance and enforcement. I think everybody realizes that if you're driving down the freeway and everybody's exceeding the speed limit, that's going to be chaos. But if you have at least some nominal level of enforcement to keep that in check, then you have an organized flow of traffic. And we feel the same way in what we do. And I think you do too, that if we have an effective compliance and enforcement system, that we're making sure that things are flowing smoothly in the oil field. Chapter 5 of the audit focused on our financial management. And that's a bit complicated unless you know specifically how the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining gets its dollars. We are not more than about 25% as an agency funded through the general fund. The other funds we rely on are federal funds. They're in our minerals program. There's what we call dedicated credits, which are fees that are paid by mineral owners or mineral operators into that program. In the oil and gas program, we primarily run off of what is called a restricted account. Means that there is a 0.2% tax on production that goes to the tax commission, and that is used to fund the operations of our oil and gas program. So the audit was somewhat critical about how we were using that money and where it was going. Chapter 6 talks about our performance metrics that we report to the legislature, that we utilize to track how well we're doing as an organization, and how well we're tracking our employees' performance through their annual evaluations. And then Chapter 7 of the audit talks about bonding processes and saying that that should be updated. Again, that's another outward-facing element of the audit that will indirectly affect the oil and gas operating community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So our preliminary response is included as the final pages of the report. So if you link to it online, you'll see that our preliminary response, which is like 4 or 5 pages, is included as part of the audit. But that just explains kind of the overview of how we would do things. It doesn't go into detail of saying, day by day, how is this going to affect our operations? And I think you'll see today, as both Bart and I present, that there's a whole raft of things that we're doing in response to the audit. And some of these things were already in progress in years in the making. It's just that the audit highlighted, you need to keep working on these things and make some progress. And as a division, my philosophy is we're not going to take this audit and cry in our beer or anything like that. We're actually going to use this as an opportunity to somewhat reinvent ourselves and become a better organization and do exactly what the citizens of Utah are expecting us to do. And that's the way I'm approaching it. So there are 14 specific recommendations given by the audit. In Chapter 2, there were 3 recommendations regarding our internal compliance processes. In Chapter 3, there were 4 recommendations regarding our inspection prioritization, how we were documenting that, and our follow-up. You'll hear more about inspection prioritization with Bart's presentation today. And then in Chapter 4, we had 1 recommendation regarding the division's fining capability. And to talk about that briefly, what they were saying is that you have some fining capability that's allowed by statute that says you can take matters to the board and have them addressed by the board, and if these are found to be non-compliance activities that require a penalty, the board can assess a penalty. The statute as it exists also says that in order to recover those fines, we have to go to civil court and have a judgment rendered against whoever it is we're fining. So it's a 2-step process. And I think the last time it was used was before my time in the early 90s, and it was found to be somewhat limited in its effectiveness. So as we embarked on what we've been doing for the last couple of decades, we saw, well, that doesn't work too well for us, so we didn't attempt to do that. But I think the auditor said, we aren't going to suggest that there be any changes in statute until you show us evidence of how hard it really is, or how effective this really is. So we have committed, as part of the audit, that in the cases that are truly justified, we would actually now go to our board and seek penalties on noncompliance. I think what you'll find is we're going to be very judicial, in my mind, in terms of how we're going to apply that. We're not just going to go willy-nilly and say everything needs a fine, because every time we do that and go to the board and then go to civil court, that's expensive in terms of staff and legal costs. So we're going to make sure that it's only used in those cases where we think it's justified and that we have a reasonable possibility of affecting an outcome. In Chapter 5 of the audit, there were 2 recommendations by the auditors regarding our financial management and how we should be doing that. In Chapter 6, there were 2 recommendations on how we should be revising our performance metrics and how we should be, not only us, but the entire Department of Natural Resources should be conducting employee evaluations. Then in Chapter 7, there were 2 recommendations regarding updating the division's bonding requirements. And I think the biggest thing they were saying there is that the audit showed that, or at least identified that we could be under bonded in terms of plugging and reclamation costs for wells across the state. So we need to take a hard look at that. We have committed that sometime early this year, maybe even this month at the board hearing, possibly next month, we would give our board a briefing on what we have looked at in terms of our bonding amounts and see if there needs to be some changes there. First of all, let me tell you, these were not easy things for us to hear. We think the tone of the audit was rather harsh, and maybe it didn't need to be that way, but the auditors certainly chose the opportunity to severely criticize us. And if you talk to any of my staff, they'll tell you, gosh, we've been working on some of these things for quite a while and we didn't get any credit for that. And yet the auditor said, you're falling short. It's black and white. There you go. So again, it wasn't easy to hear. We felt like we were beat up a little bit. But as I've just told you a few minutes ago, we're really going to use this as an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. We'd like to believe that this time next year, after we've had a whole year of working on improvement, that we'll have some great stories to tell the legislature and the auditors about the things we've been able to improve upon. One reason it was hard to hear is we've looked at over the years what we think is another part of our mission, and that is ensuring that resources of the state are responsibly developed. This is just a chart of what we have indicated as the extractive industry's productive sales value over the years. Now, in my mind, this is where wealth is created, is when you take a product out of the ground, you put it into market for the benefit of whoever's using it, and that's where you're creating all of the other streams of income that come to the state and the general public. Well, I don't know if you can see it well, the top part of that is purplish in color. That is the oil and gas amount. Over the years, that has gone as high as $5 billion of sales value. In 2018, you're looking at $2.6 billion in sales value. It'll probably be something in excess of $3 billion in sales value in the current year. But in any case, that's a lot of wealth that's created in the state. We think that's been a good thing, regardless of what you think, good or bad, of fossil fuels extraction. We think that the wealth that is generated from extractive industries in the state has been partly catalyzed by the efforts that we've had over the years in regulating the industries. And again, we didn't get any credit for that in the audit. But what we've done is we've identified 16 actions to address the recommendations of the audit. Some of these actions refer to process improvements, reducing our backlog of non-compliance follow-up, maybe improving the authorities of the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining to fine directly, rather than a two-step process of having a hearing in front of our board and then going to civil court. Maybe we can have that in one place with the board and have them be the judge to decide what a proper fine is and how it's implemented. We want to streamline that legal process. We're using a metric called weighted inspection tracking, which will allow us to say, where are inspectors spending their time, and do we need to tweak that and say, here are some areas that you need to be more focused on. Employee metrics are a big one, combining our weighted inspection tracking with the inspection prioritization, which you're going to hear about, bonding updates, and financial management strategy. Another area of improvement is technologically. We want to do database upgrades. We want to do risk-based inspection prioritization. Use drone technology. I think we're seeing that all over the place now. And I see drones as not replacing the eyes and ears of human beings, but extending our reach. If we can say that rather than an inspector having to spend all day inspecting a handful of wells, suppose they could go to one site and inspect several nearby facilities with using a drone. Database compliance tracking, expanded reporting of our metrics to the legislature, and in-field inspection tools. Resource management. We need to fill the vacancies that we've held open for a period of time because we were worried about commodity prices and the volatility of the market, because that's one thing we rely on to fund our oil and gas program. Operator education. That's actually a neat idea, because if we look at how we might use workshops, meetings such as this, to help the industry comply better with our rules and regulations, how to permit better, we think that the outcome would be improved based on us doing a little more outreach to the industry with that education. So we gave, in terms of the 14 specific recommendations, we gave those 16 action items, and I just wanted to focus on one element of the 14 recommendations from the audit and drill into that a little deeper today, and that is the performance metrics. These are our current performance metrics that we use as a division. You can see that timing of issuing of coal permits are results from our annual customer satisfaction survey. And then the last one is the only one we have affecting the oil and gas program: well drilling inspections without violations. Now, these metrics have been in place for a while. I would have to be honest with you that when they were generated, and this was maybe more than a decade ago, we were just looking for things that were easy to track and report. These metrics, we don't feel, tell a story or complete the picture of how we do business or how well we're doing business. So hearing that from the auditors, frankly, wasn't a surprise from us, but it does say we've got some work to do in terms of improving how we're reporting metrics back to the legislature. So as helpful as those current measures have been, we think they can be improved and around our stated purpose, which is reducing negative impacts to people and the environment while encouraging responsible development of the resource. Here's a map of our oil and gas operations in Utah. It's a heat map, and it kind of shows you the density of operations. Well, the darker purplish colors, as opposed to the blue colors, show where oil wells and facilities are most densely populated in the basin. That would suggest that, maybe we need to spend more time or more effort looking at those facilities, because in a sense, that's where some of the higher risks are. So we think some of the new measures that we would want to do, one is to focus on the analysis performed for decision-making to reduce risks. The bottom line for us is, how do we reduce the risks and impacts of oil and gas activities? Provide reasonable encouragement to the operating community for compliance. We think by and large the operating community is doing a great job, and I think we can show that with better metrics. But for the ones who aren't doing such a good job, we want to be able to encourage some kind of rehabilitation, try to come into line so that they're doing a better job. And we want to achieve successful reclamation of land and eliminate hazards. The new metrics ought to also have the ability to track and manage the process of monitoring inspection in order to allocate agency resources to eliminate risk. We want to timely and effectively achieve compliance, and we want to hold operators accountable to solve problems. In this manner, we think the division will provide greater value for the public from energy and mineral extraction while reducing negative impacts. So how are we going to do this with these metrics? Again, we talked about operator training and workshops to provide clear standards for applications and operations. Now, this is just one area we could improve on. We think that this would help expedite decision-making for compliant operations. So let's say, as a company, you've got 100 wells that you're operating, and you don't have any non-compliances on those wells. What we could do with these metrics is to say, well, you're doing so well as an operator that when you permit a well, maybe you move to the top of the list to get your permit first before other operators who are less compliant. We could use our risk-based data inspection system to prioritize our field staff activities. And Bart's going to talk about that a little bit more. I was mentioning to somebody before the meeting started today that that's not only going to help us, but it could also be used by the industry as an early warning system to say, where are the problems that we can solve before they actually become problems? We could establish field inspection data input parameters to mistake-proof observations. In other words, creating some standards and criteria for our field staff and say, these are the key elements of what you have to look for and what constitutes good compliance versus poor compliance. Identify standard operating procedures for all of our positions in the division to ensure consistent work. And then ensure non-compliance enforcement is occurring according to the established statutes and rules. And that refers to this process of going to our board to achieve compliance and enforcement through hearings and fines. One thing I want you to take away from this briefing is the oil and gas program staff is made up of really dedicated public servants. Those of you who aren't government employees in this room probably don't understand what it means to be a public servant. We serve a lot of different masters. And unfortunately, some of those people have louder voices than others. So we want to be sure that we're serving the public properly, but we have to listen to some of those loud voices. And they can get pretty loud, sometimes obnoxious, but we still have to listen to them. So in order to be a dedicated public servant, you have to take some of that and work with it to actually produce something that the public is going to benefit from. We are taking the audit findings seriously, and we are making significant progress because it's our staff who are committed to improvement. Change is hard. I guarantee you, it's hard for me, it's hard for anyone. Outside criticism has been difficult, especially when we're trying to do the best job we can. But as our employees get the support that they need from leadership, meaning internally within the department, the governor's office, the legislature, as we get additional resources, meaning filling positions, maybe in the future we would ask for additional support from the legislature, through streamlined processes, our staff will get the program to where it needs to be, that next level. So that's as much as I had to talk about regarding the audit today. I'm happy to answer questions, but you can also email me give me a call. Let me know your thoughts after you've had a chance to read the audit. And Bart and I have said we're happy to sit down with anybody and get down in the weeds with you as to what this means. So thanks a bunch, and any questions at this point? I don't see hands being raised in the room. Let me see if I can check real quickly online.
It looks like we have a question back here. Just to also remind everyone, the Cub Scout stick rule is in place, so whoever has the stick and has a question, use the stick, please.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, given some of your comments, did you think the overall process was a fair one for your agency? Maybe that's a loaded question.
It is kind of loaded. I think the auditors got some things right. They got some things wrong. But obviously, it is difficult to argue with a legislative audit. It probably doesn't do a lot of good for you to debate that.
Right.
But I think our attitude is, it is what it is. We're going to move forward. We think we have some good things to show. We think we were already doing some good things, and we're going to make a more concerted effort to show what those good things are.
But was that your, I guess, frustration, is that you were already working on a number of these things to improve the agency, and you didn't get any recognition in the audit report? Was that?
Bluntly, yes. I
Okay.
really feel like, if I was to grade our program before the audit, I would have said, if not an A minus, a solid B plus. But if you read the audit and get a chance to see it, I believe both the tone and the way they identified issues gives us a failing grade. And I thought that was really unfair. Yes, sir.
Yeah, then we come up.
So when do you think that you'll have your new processes rolled out?
It's interesting. You're going to see Bart talk about one today, which is inspection prioritization, which has frankly been in the works for, I'm guessing, a couple of years. Well, we went live with it within the last month and a half. And I think you'll see we're already achieving some value from that process. More of the processes will roll out probably within the next 3 to 6 months. And we are committed, we've already been charged by the Legislative Audit Subcommittee to come back and give a report to them a year from the date of the audit to say how well we've achieved progress in meeting those audit recommendations. So well within the year, but I think a lot of the things you're going to see changes come about in the next quarter or two. Yes, sir.
When do you expect to actually deliver on a 2-year-old promise to get our 5-year permit renewals out?
Well, I think I might have to rely on either Bart or John to help me with that. But I know the 5-year permit renewals have been reliant, in some cases, on bonding improvements. Do you have an answer for that, Bart? Or come on up.
Actually, he'll come over. Keep it in case you have a problem.
And I think what I'll do is, while Bart's up here answering that question, I'll probably just turn the time over to him at this point for his part of this presentation, but I'll have him answer that question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was about EMP waste disposal facilities and when can we expect those applications that we've submitted to be finished. And so what it refers to is a rule change requiring operators of disposal facilities to submit an application For review, there was a 5-year window for that to be submitted. Unfortunately, the division didn't receive any additional funding or staff for that. So the question is oriented, hey, we're still waiting for ours. Where's it at? We're working through them. One at a time, we're getting through them. We're a little over halfway through them at this point. It sounds like in your case, there may be one still missing that you're waiting for.
I'm waiting on 2. Okay, thanks.
You know how to get to your presentation.
I got one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead. Tommy, can you show us how to get to Bart's presentation? Well, thank you again, and I will be here through the end of the meeting, so feel free to come and ask me a question about it if you want.
What's up?
Okay, Bart Kettle with the State of Utah Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. I'm here today to present on a software project we've been working on. We're calling it Inspection Prioritization. So just briefly, why inspection prioritization? Obviously, John went through in the audit a recommendation, so it's in Chapter 3, that I'm going to paraphrase it, that says, we recommend the oil and gas program to continue to develop an evidence-based approach to inspection timelines. So that placed some emphasis on getting this project completed. However, it was a project we were actually working on well before that. And so it's, as John alluded to, it's a little painful to be criticized in an audit openly in a public setting that you need to get something done. However, it also added a high degree of emphasis that, in fact, we were working on the right thing and we needed to continue forward with that. So essentially, why inspection prioritization? The aim of the field inspection prioritization program is to provide the oil and gas field inspectors a tool to more efficiently and effectively inspect wells and facilities to protect the citizens of the state and the environment. As a tool, it's not really designed to replace the human decision-making process. It's more designed to aid that process. And so provide a visual and also a reporting mechanisms to draw attention to areas where maybe we need to put attention, or areas that are receiving adequate attention, or in some cases, maybe draw our attention to places where we may need more resources. So the concept behind field inspection prioritization, the obvious question is, where do I go first? So we're dealing with roughly 16,000 unplugged wells in the state of Utah. How does a person pick which well they're going to go to first? And how does our staff balance which wells they're going to go to for a routine inspection along with all the more higher priority inspections? And so if you look at this slide, it just kind of lists out some of the inspections that our staff may respond to. Well, if you notice, the final one is routine inspections. So how do we conduct those over a long period of time, and how do we conduct those across the entire state in a method that they're done uniformly? So here's where I kind of want to get into a little bit on the audit. Provided the recommendation, it really provided the emphasis for us to get this program out. We started the concept of using GIS information to provide a score for where we inspect next or how we inspect. We started down that road several years ago, but as we got into it a little deeper, we realized we didn't quite have the expertise in the arena of writing script and in the arena of writing code to finish the product. So in the fall of 2018, the Groundwater Protection Council entered the picture. They were also interested in a similar project and wanted to kind of collaborate with the state's oil and gas program to do something of this nature. So the pilot area was called the Duchesne County Proof of Concept. Duchesne County, frankly, was chosen because of the availability of information in the county to do the project, and because of some of the information that the state's oil and gas program had compiled and kind of prepared. And so the original proof of concept was simply a GIS exercise to see if there was a way that we could assign a score value to various potential receptors and look at that in relation to wells and determine which wells may be a high priority for inspecting. So the proof of concept started in the fall of 2018. By February of 2019, we basically had a proof of concept that said, yes, this does work. We can get some meaningful information from this. At that point, the division sat down with the Groundwater Protection Council, looked at the information. Both sides were equally enthused by what we seen. And so what we started to do was develop a plan of action. But one of the items we wanted in that plan of action is we wanted what we call operational data. And so that's data that comes from our database that might reflect to the well or the time since it's been inspected, something of that nature, and not necessarily just a GIS exercise. In May of 2019, we started down the road of a project that we've now termed inspection prioritization, which did in fact combine the GIS component and also the operational component from our database. So it was two parts, and started in earnest working on the project at that point. So as I spoke earlier, inspection prioritization is really comprised of two parts. It's comprised of an operational data component and a GIS or geospatial component. The operational factors, just generally summarized, that are used in the program are the compliance history of the well, the age of the well or facility, and the date since last inspection. The geographic factors that are used in the system, just generalized, fall under one of four categories: groundwater, surface water, population, or wildlife. So as we started working on this project, the Groundwater Protection Council actually works with quite a few states on projects similar to this. And when I say states, a lot of it is oil and gas regulatory agencies like ourselves, but they do some other work as well. And so there was kind of two goals of this. As a state oil and gas program, we wanted it to satisfy a need that we thought we had, but the Groundwater Protection Council also wanted this to be a product that could be used by other people down the road. So kind of the general principles behind it was to develop a generic process and framework that could be easily transferred to other states, ensure the process is transparent and easily understood. In other words, the end users, in our case our staff, can look at the scoring model, can go out and apply this, and there's no hidden process to it. They know exactly why that well is the priority level that it is, and what factors may change it over time. We wanted to make the application scalable and customizable. So as I talked earlier, it started out as just Duchesne County, but we really wanted to include the whole state. And in the case of the Groundwater Protection Council, they wanted it to fit whatever scale other users may have down the road. And we wanted to make it to where, as we learn, because with any project, you start out with an idea, you think you've thought it through really well, but as you get into it, you find out there's things you didn't recognize right off the bat. And so we wanted to make sure that it could be customized as we went along, so the user could include as many JS layers as needed as the process evolved, or they could change the scoring metrics as analytics or as experience told them that it needed to be done. And then the other thing that was really important to the Groundwater Protection Council, as well as to ourselves, was to assure that the buffer distance of the scoring models were established by the individual state committees. So it was specific to whoever was using it. So in our case, we did assemble a specific state kind of task force group to work on the buffer distances and what score would be assigned to them. We wanted to make sure that the process was automated as possible. So the updates would happen at night when we're asleep. The computer would take that work and do it for us. We wouldn't have to come in every morning and do it first thing before it could be used. And then provide a detailed documentation and user guide at the end so the end users know what the product is and what they can do with it. Oop. So as a previous slide showed, there's two components to inspection prioritization that really makes it run. There is the operational component, which is data pulled from our database. There is a GIS component, which is a series of GIS layers with various potential receptors. So this set of slides is in regards to the GIS component. So the first step is to assemble the relevant GIS layers. Which receptors are you going to choose to score and rank in the system? And just kind of in summary again, for the program that we're using, the receptors that we have is groundwater, surface water, population, and wildlife. So once the relevant GIS data is assembled, then it's time to start to create buffers for it. And the baseline concept behind the buffers is the further a site is from a potential receptor, the lower the score. But there's a process to get there. So the first step in this example on a perennial stream, you have a line feature. That line feature has a buffer put on it. In this case, a 100-foot stream buffer. That 100-foot stream buffer is assigned a relative score value. The next step is that 100-foot buffer is now assigned a second buffer, in this case, in the example, a 1 to 300-foot buffer. That is assigned a score value, and so forth and so on until the score value is 0. The second buffer type would be for point data, where it's basically just a circle of a determined distance from that. In this example, domestic water wells, that point data has a buffer of 1,320 feet from the point. So step 3, once you've got all of your buffers assigned, how many of those buffers does an individual well intersect and correspondent? So how many hits does it get, which will affect its end score? So in this example, we have 5 GIS layers shown, address point for population, stream buffers, lake buffers, water well buffers, and alluvial polygon. If we look through this example, we can see that the oil and gas well fell within the address point buffer. It fell within a stream buffer. It fell just outside of a lake buffer. It fell within a water well buffer, and it fell outside of the alluvial polygon buffer. So in this specific example, this well would get a score value for 3 of the 5 items. And this isn't quite detailed enough, but in the case of the stream buffer, it doesn't get the highest score value. It gets a once removed value because it's in the second buffer set. Along with the buffers, there's 2 types of values added in the intersect process. So one is just the straight intersect. Does this well or does this facility land within the buffer for a specific potential receptor? Yes or no? The second one is how many times does it land within buffer? So a count of the total. Once your buffers are created and your intersects are completed, all that information is stored in a data sheet for a GIS data sheet for each individual well within the state. That information is combined with the score table. The score table is an item that was created by our state task force, which it sounds like a pretty simple process to go through and score things. It was actually very difficult. It took several tries going through it, scoring how we think things would rate out, running some hypotheticals, going back, adjusting, and then once we actually ran the first test run of it and got our first data back statewide, then there was a process of going back actually several times to adjust items to where we make sure we have the desired outcome. So you combine your GIS intersect results with the score method table. You end up with your score results table. That's the final, and then the final step for the GIS output is, once you've got that score table, that table is then used to develop a spatial layer, which can then be used by the oil and gas staff to determine where they go next. So there's now two components available for staff. There's a spatial component. In this case, we chose red, which red is sort of a standard alert or draw your attention to it color. So if we're looking at this spatially, we can see immediately a handful of red wells here at the top of the example. That would draw your attention to it. So there's the spatial part where you're just cued in based on color coding alone. The reporting mechanism is really in the data tables, in the information that can be queried later, and we'll show an example of that in just a little bit. The second step in the inspection prioritization is the operations portion. And so there's less steps in the operation data. It was actually almost more difficult to get it selected and get it extracted and get it pulled out. It took a little more coding. It took a little more time for us to get that. But the baseline concept is really the same. You determine the relevant data or criteria that you're going to use. If we refer back to an earlier slide, it was the compliance history of an individual site, it was the age of the site, and it was the time since the last inspection. You execute the stored procedures, the score value sheet, if you will, and then you output that to a data table and a spatial GIS layer. So that's just a really brief overview of the concept behind the program. Here's an example of the output. I've chosen this area very specifically because I think it kind of demonstrates what the program's going to design is meant to do. So if we look at the center, we can kind of see some pretty interesting things happen. A majority of the wells are blue, and so there are three priorities, priority 1 through 3. Priority 1 wells are the highest priority well for us to conduct an inspection on. They're represented by a red dot. Priority 2 are yellow dots. And priority 3 wells are represented by a blue dot. They're the lowest priority for us to inspect. And it's kind of what you would probably expect if you're familiar with the Uinta Basin, where we're in a fairly arid desert region where there's not a lot of water resources, ground or surface water. There's not a lot of people that live there. So there's not a lot of receptors, but we do have a couple of major drainages through the middle. So they'll show up in the wells being a middle or a priority 2. And we have a lot of blue wells or a lower priority well through the majority of the area. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see that we've got quite a few red wells where you would expect them under this scoring mechanism. They're in the agriculture areas where we would expect a surface water component, where we would expect a groundwater component, where there may be a population vector. So we have a lot more red wells or high priority wells in that area. But we also have a fair number of yellow wells and at times blue wells. And those are really driven in, once again, the compliance history and the time since last inspection. So what we see here is these wells have been inspected more recently. This group of red wells hasn't. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see that pretty graphically in that we've got basically a township of red wells right here, adjacent to multiple townships of blue wells where they've been inspected recently, so they're lower priority, and yet for some reason we've got a longer inspection frequency on these wells, so they end up being a higher priority. We see the same thing over here in the Leland Bench area, where you can actually see exactly how the inspector in that case inspected these wells. This is the most recent. This is probably the next group they'll go to, and this is the last group they've been to. It's just how they've inspected them in the past. The other thing that inspection prioritization can give us, it can give us some advanced analytics, and it can give us a dashboard to start working with. So this is just an overview of the state as a whole. But you see that for the most part, there's a fairly even distribution of red versus yellow versus green wells across the state. If we look at the breakdown, which this is fairly informative to me, If we look at the breakdown, we recognize that approximately 14%, 13.8% of the wells in the state end up being a priority 1 well, or wells that are going to receive our highest priority to inspect. So that number equates to 894 wells in the state. And then we can go through, so the priority 2 wells, 52% of them, the majority of them, which is what you would expect, end up as being priority 2 wells. 33.9, basically 34%, end up being priority 3 wells, or the lowest priority to inspect in the state. And then we included a bar chart here at the bottom, and it's based on the number of days since last inspection. And it's really what you would expect for a program like this. So if we draw a line across this, it would start out high on the left and going to right would decline. And that's exactly what you'd expect for a program, that we would have most of our wells having been inspected relatively recently. And then as time goes on, we wouldn't have very many wells. And that's what we see, except for we do have one anomaly here that really stands out from everything else. We've got 51 wells that has been an extended period of time since they've been inspected. So the immediate question is, why is that? And when we look at those wells, I happen to know where these wells are. They're probably the furthest point in the state, the most remote wells in the state to get to. So they've had a longer period since they've been inspected. These will be some of the priority wells that we expect to inspect here in the coming days or weeks. So this graph chart, it just immediately draws your attention to that. It also comes with a reporting mechanism that we can export into an Excel format and query it or manipulate the data in a way we want to kind of have similar things jump out to us. So as a baseline high overview, that's my presentation today. Is there any questions from the audience? I did forget one item. So this is really just a starting point. We started on this, like we said, about 2 years ago. We're really excited to have it in place. We feel a little unfortunate that we didn't have it out before the audit, but as I mentioned earlier, it does it's a little reaffirming for us. We've been criticized for not having this in place, but it's very reaffirming. Hey, we were headed down the right road. We had the right ideas. We were trying to get the right things done. This provides emphasis on it. Yes, we need to get this done. It also provides a lot of support in the form that, yes, keep going on this. These are projects you need to work on. So this really kind of provides a platform for us of what's next. Well, more advanced reporting built into it so we can query it more. A dashboard for the individual staff members so they can at a glance have this kind of information more just available to them every day as they log in. Electronic forms so that if folks are out in the field, they can just automatically fill out their inspection. It's seamless. They see what needs to be done, they go do it, they fill out their inspection, they're done. A compliance portion where compliance is filled out automatically in the field. Operators are notified. They have the ability to react to it instantly. It's not a delayed process. We know where we're at. It's very transparent for both sides. And eventually we'd like to see this roll over into the application for permit to drill evaluation process as well. So, okay, that concludes my presentation. Any questions from the audience?
And I have the remote microphone again, so if anyone has a question.
I have a question about your scoring of water wells. Some water wells are public wells and some are private wells. Do you score those different, or is there a plan to do that different?
They are scored differently, yes.
Yeah, the same with surface water, right?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Hi, Bart. I had a question. Did you do this software in-house? Did you have a consultant? How did you get the resources to build this excellent tool?
It's a partnership with the Oil and Gas Program and the Groundwater Protection Council, and so we really relied pretty heavily on a contractor with Groundwater Protection Council, Line 45, to do the coding and a lot of the scripts. Well, actually, Groundwater Protection Council did the scripts, but Line 45 did the coding behind it.
I think I'd like to add to that, Bart, that the process of software development is not easy, and we are not a Microsoft or a Google that can do this in a short period of time and have a lot of resources to devote to it. So 2 years of a project like this in the making is not unusual for what we've come up with. And I don't know if you know any specific numbers, Bart, but do you know how many dollars were spent in the software development part of this?
I can't answer that on a very specific number. It's actually, in the world of software, the conceptual part of selecting the layers and the concept behind it was the hardest part, and just getting started, getting that ball initially rolling. That was actually the hardest part. In theory, it's actually quite cheap, but it's very difficult to get going. Once we got it going there, it went pretty quickly. I will say, in the world of software development, this one was relatively inexpensive because we chose to make a product. We had a self-imposed time frame to have this as a testable product by the end of October of 2018, which we met, or 2019, I'm sorry, thank you for the correction. So we had a self-imposed time frame to get this out, and we also chose to, we would have loved to have had more advanced reporting mechanisms in it, but we chose to focus on getting the first step out and getting it out rather than getting perfect. And so the next phase is immediately a reporting metrics. And it's kind of it's a catch-22 because you want them both at the same time, but if you make the project too complicated, you can never get to the end goal. If you get to the end goal and you don't make it complicated enough, of course you always wish you had more, but I really kind of think you're better off to get the end goal, get the product on the ground, get it being used, learn from your mistakes, because it doesn't matter how much time or effort you put into the planning. Once you get into it, you'll always find out that you forgot things, or you left things out, or something that you just never crossed your mind pops up immediately. Like the very first day you test it, something pops up. So I can't give you the exact dollar amount, but this one was actually fairly cheap because we chose to keep it fairly brief and fairly quick. It was a small group that developed it. The subsequent dashboard and electronic forms, those are pretty elaborate projects. You know, even with a fairly sizable budget, those are a year to 18 months to get those out, and very expensive to do.
We got a question right here.
Yep, Danny.
Yeah. How many wells are in the state? How many inspectors? And I know you've prioritized, but is there a goal to inspect every well in the entire state? Or I just was curious about that kind of information.
You bet. So there's multiple answers to every question you have there. So wells in the state, there's just over inching towards 17,000 unplugged wells in the state. Inspection prioritization, the program itself, is designed to provide a score value for the wells that the state's oil and gas program is the primary inspection group for. And so that would include wells with a state or fee component on them, and that would also include wells where the oil and gas program has the primacy in regards to the underground injection control program for Class 2 wells. So there's just under 17,000 unplugged wells in the state. Inspection prioritization provides a ranking value for just a little over 8,000 of those wells. What was your next question? How many inspectors? Currently, we're sitting right now with a staff of roughly 7 people in the state that they're at least a portion of their primary goal is to complete inspections. I will note all of them actually do have other tasks that they're trying to complete in addition to that. We're trying to work on that and get some more staff members on, but we're currently sitting with 7. And then your last question was, the frequency. The frequency actually, so that's in the score table. The frequency depends on what type of well it is. And so the frequencies are uniform across the well for that well type, but it actually does depend on the well type or facility type that it is.
In the past, we've shot for once a year for every well, but this is going to change that.
And I just wanted to emphasize and kind of build on something that Bart mentioned, and that is, we rushed to get a base model out there, and we have some follow-on phases and some other features that we want to add into the system. We took some efforts to make the software and the architecture that goes into this fairly easy to modify, so that we don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel and recode the whole program to add some new feature. A lot of that can be built in pretty easily. and some of it even really in-house, with particularly with things like changing priorities or adding new GIS layers as something else becomes available, or whatever. So we've got the capability to address things that we want to do, and maybe just things that come up or other technologies that come up 2 or 3 years down the road that we want to be able to incorporate this. So we've got those options in there, kind of pre-built.
Yeah, and one of the things I can assure you, because we've already gone through this curve, we will learn from this process. We'll actually learn from the results of this and build on it in the future. I mean, the very first drop, if you will, kind of the test product we got, it was fairly eye-opening. We learned 2 or 3 things from it immediately. And that process continued as we start to deploy this more heavily on a statewide basis. I have no doubt whatsoever we'll continue to learn from that process, which is really kind of how it should be. But so you'll see an evolution over time as we learn from kind of the various inputs.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
So you had a bit of success. You dropped the unresolved issues for inspections from 105 down to 35 in the past few months. I was wondering what kind of the profile of the 70 or so that you successfully resolved looked like, and what the remaining 35, what those unresolved issues look like.
So at this point, it's actually 10 remaining items unresolved. The majority of those will end up being, they're more long-term. They'll end up being board items. They're not easy to resolve. Of the items that were resolved you're referring to, so let's take that just under 100. Some of them were follow-up items to assure the compliance had been completed. Some of them were data entry items into the database. In other words, the follow-up had been completed, but we didn't complete the whole process. Compliance for us is frankly a 4-step process, which it doesn't really matter who you are. That's a difficult process to complete. Inspection prioritization is the first step to simplify that. And our end goal is for compliance to be a 1-step process. So we talked about prior in this that future components will include a compliance that makes it more transparent to the operator and to the state. At that point, it will be a 1-step process.
I guess I would add to some of the things that Bart's saying. What we've talked about today, I mentioned metrics, is one response we have to the audit. The inspection prioritization is another response, but we're really only touching on a couple of things today that are things that are already in the works, things that we're working on. There are other things in response to the audit, and as I said before, will probably roll out within the next 3 to 6 months. And I think, like I say, you're going to see somewhat of a transformation for the oil and gas program. We had another question?
Inspections for E&P waste facilities had historically been a higher priority or occurred in greater frequency than well inspections. Are those, brought into this weighted inspection tracking matrix, or will those be a separate item?
Yes, they will be included into this inspection prioritization metrics as well.
I think what I understand is the way the risk prioritization module works, it treats those facilities and other facilities as inspectable units. So we're not just talking about wells. It could involve the disposal facilities. It could involve maybe even a compressor site here or there. It looks like we've answered most of the... here we go.
Will we be able to get on the UDOGM website and find information on inspections, NOV status of permitting on new and old sites?
The end goal for this is that the inspection and the compliance component would become available to the operator once it's certified. So, and by certified, that means really once it's completed on the ground, it would automatically become available to the operator. Obviously, that would require setting up who the operator is and who that information is going to go to. But yes, the end goal is that that stuff would become automatically available.
Okay.
Okay, I think we've covered most of the programs in the room, so thanks, Bart. And Bart didn't tell you about this, but he has been involved. He has been involved with the division in the oil and gas program for about 15 years, Bart, is that right? So he's come up through the ranks. He understands the challenges associated with field inspection, how to get it done well, how you have to wake up every morning and somewhat prioritize your day. Otherwise, you'll never get it all done. So I really appreciate having Bart's expertise in this regard, and he's doing a good job at it. I think that pretty much wraps up our agenda, but I do want to take the time to do a brief roundtable of both local governments, other agencies, people who have things they need to address. This is a collaborative meeting, so our intention is to get as many issues out on the table so that we as a division can help identify what your concerns are, and then also find ways to network so that if there are people in the room who can help solve some of the problems that are being identified out there, we can get those folks together. So maybe Tommy, bring up the room lights. I do want to thank the folks in Duchesne County for all of the efforts to make this meeting occur in this facility. We find it very convenient to be able to drive from Salt Lake to get here. It's, and I don't know what the reason is, but it seems like it's a lot longer when we used to have to go to Vernal. But it does seem like it's a fairly easy trip to make. And it's also centrally located with our folks who work out at the Price office too. But in any case, we really thank the county for facilitating this and using this facility and all that you do to help us out. And of course, there's great refreshments out there, so please take advantage of that. But in terms of the county, does Duchesne County have anything they want to talk about or announce today? I'm not seeing any hands go up. How about Uinta County?
About the only thing I would mention is the rail, and frankly, that's where the other two commissioners and I think a couple of the Duchesne County commissioners are. So that is being handled more by Seven County. Brad Horrocks, Commissioner Horrocks, is probably the most authoritative voice on that. So outside of that, I don't really have anything.
Got Irene here.
First of all, welcome to Duchesne County. And on the break, by the way, I know that everybody ate healthy this morning, so we have healthy smoothies from our wonderful little health center here called Nourish. It's right behind Cowan's here just off Main Street, but she has smoothies out here today. So anyway, don't leave without one, they're delicious. First of all, we welcome everyone here, and although I want to be very careful what I say, and I understand that there's always processes in the state and local level, as far as the audit goes, that I would just like to give a voice and a shout out from government to government and from Duchesne County and from the Economic Development Office that we have had the utmost respect and good relationship with DOGM, the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining. In my 25 years prior to being a commissioner in economic development, we communicated sometimes as often as daily, worked on projects at the legislature, and I have just admired their staff and admired how I felt like that they worked in a very cohesive and respectful way with industry, and I, for one, have appreciated that. And so I just wanted to give you my personal vote of confidence and appreciation for what I feel was a job well done. Maybe we, some of us who can, need to continue to tell that side of the story. Again, we always want to make sure that you get good dates on your schedule, and of course, save the date. One of the funnest things I ever did was be able to have the opportunity to interview Mike Williams as the keynote speaker. And it is going to be hard to top that. Not hard to top me, but hard to top him. And so, man, put on your thinking caps and let's give him some good ideas. And we look forward to a busy oil and gas season. And we're always here to help. If you need to reach out to one of the commissioners, we're always available to talk to our industry partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask real quickly, is there anyone from the Ute tribe that is in the room that would like to bring up any issues? Okay. Other government entities. Oops, sorry.
Not from the Ute tribe, but from Utah Petroleum Association. Good morning, everyone. Ricky Ranko Browning. I would just like to echo Irene's comments about the recent legislative audit that has come out. I know that's been very challenging for a number of us, for the division, for us as industry members, to kind of sit quietly when we see some of those headlines come out. Happy to share some additional thoughts on that on a one-on-one basis, but I just want to say that we very much stand behind the division. We look forward to working together. We understand that there are going to be some changes that are going to need to occur as a result of that audit, whether that be in bonding or some other enforcement mechanisms and tools. And as an industry, we need to be in a very supportive and cooperative position to make sure that our regulator has the teeth they need to regulate us, and it's in all of our best interests to do so. So we appreciate the division's position and the response that you have taken in being very measured and looking at this from a proactive, what can we do better position. So thank you for that. Just one other small comment. There are a number of things that we're working on together with the division in terms of rulemaking, whether that be forced pooling, operatorship, horizontal rules coming ahead, bonding. So if anyone has any questions about those issues, questions about the legislative audit, or questions about the recent tax reform proposal and what that might mean for all of you and for your operations, please just let me know. I'll be around today after the meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. And to let you know, we enjoy the working relationship we have with the trade associations in Utah. We work with both the Petroleum Association and the Mining Association, not as necessarily close collaborators, because there is always a arm's length relationship between the regulator and the regulated community. But we do recognize that if we work together, we can usually reach effective and mutually acceptable solutions to problems way ahead of the time they become real problems. So I really appreciate Ricky and the relationship we have. Let me ask again, other government entities, we know we've heard in the past from DEQ, DWR, the water folks. Here we go.
I just wanted to mention Tri-County Health Department has adopted a new rule on hauling drinking water. And I know that doesn't affect a lot of you, but it now requires drinking water haulers to have a permit to haul water out to oil industries, to the drilling rigs, and to the labor camps. The liquid waste haulers have already been under that requirement to have a permit, and they come out and haul sewage off of those drill sites, and they have a sticker on them that says they're permitted. That will also occur with the drinking water now, in case you're involved with that.
Thank you very much. John Rogers.
John Rogers with the division. I just wanted to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to all the employees of the oil and gas section. I can tell you firsthand of the quality of their work, their dedication, and their desire to see the best things happen in the oil industry. You know their professionalism if you've ever worked with them. And at this time, I wanted to recognize some of them that are right here, right now. These are eyes and ears of the oil industry out in the basin and throughout the state. And I'd like to recognize Richard Powell, raise your hand, Orlin Wallace, Mark Jones, Mark Gwynn, Chase Hamburg, and we had Dennis Ingram, who worked for us for 25 years, 20? And had 40 plus years of oil and gas experience, just retired last December, so we will miss him, but we're in the process of getting a new inspector out here. But anyway, I want to let you know the quality of what they do, and I can tell you firsthand what they do, and despite what you read and hear and see, they're the best. Thanks.
I echo that, John. I think all of the employees of the division, but especially the ones in the oil and gas program, I think do a remarkable job for the state of Utah and the citizens, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Yes.
Hi, my name's Lexi. I'm with the Utah Division of Air Quality. I just wanted to remind everyone that ozone season is starting. If you're on Dr. Seth Lyman's email list, you will have received an ozone alert yesterday. Our numbers are climbing, and so I just wanted to remind you that there are a lot of voluntary actions that you can take to reduce your emissions during these high ozone periods. And DEQ also has an IR camera that is free for you to borrow and use. You can just go to ulend.utah.gov and you can check it out from us, and then use that to inspect your sites for leaks. Thanks.
Thanks, Lexi.
You mentioned taking questions on other divisions. A few months ago, we heard that solid and hazardous waste and UDOGM might be combining the efforts to regulate both, I guess we call them DEQ ponds and other like bioremediation land farms. Is that ongoing, or is it not going to mature?
You know, I would be the first one to know about that, and I know that I haven't had any conversations with DEQ about combining activities at those facilities. It's certainly something we could talk about, but I haven't advanced that discussion very far. Is there anyone here from DEQ who has better knowledge than I have about that? Okay, I'm sorry. Again, that's not something that is even on my radar screen at this point. Okay. Alan.
As in the past, our collaborative meetings we've had used to be for a year, now we're back to 2. I was just wondering why we have our executive secretary of the president of the Petroleum Association. Is the date, is it going to be April 9th that we'll have that collaborative meeting that you also sponsor along with our counties and the royalty owners?
I think what Mr. Smith is talking about is your community dinner.
Yeah. Okay, oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Other folks who have things they want to bring up for their respective organizations? If not, thank you for being here. We normally take the spring meeting of this group, the April meeting, and in the past we've called it our hydrocarbon conference. But in discussing this with the Office of Energy Development, who helps us organize this, they've recently undergone some reorganization, so we're still hoping to do that. If not, it'll just be a normal collaborative meeting like we normally do, but we're kind of slow in getting that organized, but we will still have a meeting the second week in April, and I'm not sure exactly what the date is right now, but I think John's looking it up real quick. Seemed like there was one more thing I wanted to say, but it's escaping me at this point. April 9th? Okay, perfect. So with that, I know Commissioner said that we had some great break refreshments out there, but we'll just call an adjournment to this meeting until April, and hope to see you all then and hear from you. Again, if you have any questions regarding the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, please feel free to email me or give me a call, and happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.